So they more or less just told us Columbina's identity, and we pretty much know the identity of every single Harbinger now, more or less, except for the rooster. Dragon. Man, I really need to update my Fatui Harbingers video. Don't worry, that'll be something on the agenda. But for now, let's focus on Columbina because we got a ton of hints about her and nobody's talking about it. Columbina is an angel from Celestia and might just be the reason why the Fatui Harbingers know about the false sky all along, Project Stuja, how they knew about the Gnosis being the remains of the third descender, and having pretty much intel on every single thing about Teyvat, both past and present, ancient Celestia, and all of the secrets of Genshin Impact. But what is her relationship with death? That is what we're here to discuss. One of the first videos on this channel, and a video that I brought over from my old channel, it's almost 2.5 years old, was talking about how Columbina is either the Shade of Death or linked to the Shade of Death, which I truly do believe this is still the case. We obviously know that she's not the Shade of Death, Ronova is, but it's funny that the Captain has some cryptic dialogue at the end of the Archon quest, with his own connection to the Shade of Death, how the Lord of Night functions in Natlan, all the angel references within Natlan that manifest from the Night Kingdom, and then we have Columbina, who is the most intriguing and mysterious Harbinger. She always has been. Very angelic-like features that are plain as day. Her very ominous personality, the very ominous aura around her, and her very strange constellation. Top 3 Harbingers being stated to be as strong as gods. And how the Fatui even knew about the false sky. Scaramouche mentioned it back in 1.1, and then the Doctor mentioned it at the end of Sumeru's Archon quest. The Fatui have been going around claiming the Gnosis from every region, being the remains of the third descender. More or less, the Fatui know every single thing, every little secret, every little thing about the false sky, how Teyvat functions, the rules, the propaganda, they know all of it. And Columbina might be a big part of that. Also, I just want to say how funny it is that the Captain, being such a no-nonsense guy, just straight up drops his lore for us, plain as day. No nonsense, but also has a very cryptic relationship with the Shade of Death himself. So let's go over the facts, what we know and what we learned in the Archon quest, and go from there. The Lord of Night, being who presides over the Wyab and the Night Kingdom of Natlan, all the heroes of Natlan's past, the ancient name bearers, everyone currently in Natlan, through the obsidian obelisks from each tribe, they all worship and get guidance from the Night Kingdom and the Wyab. She says that the people of Natlan worshipped her, and they referred to her as their lord, but in the ancient past, referring to before the war in the heavens took place, probably before the false sky was even put up there. Before the Moon Sisters were killed, we know many gods lived in Celestia, counting all the Seelies we can see and all the ancient gods of the past. They were referred to as angels, which gives me such validation. Finally, because I've been saying this for literally years. And then she says now, we probably would recognize them by their more familiar title as Seelies. Banished from Celestia to Teyvat, stripped of their power. And we know that all Seelies, or gods, are different in status. They're not all the same. The primordial one was the apex god in its heyday, establishing Celestia, all of humanity back in the day, when they usurped the Dragon King Nibelung and the Seven Sovereigns, conquering Teyvat. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because I already did in my last video, but she says that few angels remain in Natlan, and same for the Seelies. Mawika then states that the ancient battle between a Descender and the dragons destroyed the corner of the world, again referring to a Nibelung returned and probably introduced Teyvat to abyssal corruption for the first time, which probably destroyed the heavens, which is the real Celestia we're seeing with the dead Moon Sister. Probably why all the Seelies and angels were banished in the first place, and had to be sealed off with a false sky. It seems very likely. We then get to talk to the Lord of Night by herself, and she states the ruler of death helped establish the rules of Natlan, and her name was Rovana, and that under her guidance, that I, the Lord of Night, created the Night Kingdom. So the Lord of Night is an angel from Celestia that served under the ruler of death, the Shade of Death. The primordial one was the apex god. In Celestia, we know the primordial one created 4 shining shades. The 4 shades, all aspects of existence, and obviously the 4 shades being the strongest gods or angels in Celestia, besides the primordial one themselves, the heavenly principles. So it makes sense that there'd be angels that work under each shade. Clearly the Lord of Night, I'm not even going to try to pronounce her name, forget it, worked for the ruler of death under her guidance, and was tasked with presiding over the Night Kingdom and establishing the Wayam. So the Lord of Night would be no slouch in her own right, being a powerful angel from Celestia working under the Shade of Death. Did this out of expression of love and an act of respiration. She was then viewed as significantly overstepping her authorities as a shade, working for the heavenly principles directly, which obviously quite displeased the almighty heavenly principles. Then it says weirdly she succumbed to self-pity as a result and no longer cared if others discussed her identity. Even so, her existence remains unknown besides a select few, so the Lord of Night worked under the Shade of Death, where the captain states that the power of the Pyro Archon used to strike back the Abyss came from the ruler of death. From what I know of her rules, she will demand death in return, which means he's familiar with the Lord of Death, and even the Lord of Night seems to be surprised by this, saying, "How do you know this?" And then she says, "Ah, so the ruler of death sent you on your long journey." Natlan still has a final battle to fight, and I too have a final foe to face. For the sake of those countless lost souls, I need your help. Now this is a mixed bag of a lot of different possible meanings. Firstly, the Shade of Death could be directly responsible and linked to the fact that Conrians were cursed with immortality, seeing as that they can't die. The Shade of Death above all shades would have a great manipulation over death, resurrection, and people that simply cannot die. The Shade of Death could be directly responsible for why Conrians have immortality to begin with. She might have had no choice under the direct rules of the heavenly principles, but one thing I can say for certain, especially with that line over the Shade of Death, overstepping her authorities with the heavenly principles and ticking them off, all of the shades seem to have had a falling out with Celestia. Whoever's running it, whether it be the primordial one or the second who came as the heavenly principles, it's left ambiguous whether the primordial one was corrupted after Nibelung brought the Abyss here for the first time, hence the false sky needing to be put up. We're not exactly sure the circumstance, but it's definitely suggested that all shades have had a falling out. Istaroth went immediately to help the people of Enkanomiya. Their civilization got destroyed and sunk into the abyss. All the old civilizations under the benevolent primordial one were wiped out with celestial nails. The landscapes in the world changed. And this goes for every region as well. Something happened to the original Hydro Dragon, so the Shade of Life created Egeria to not only be the first Hydro Archon, but to be the new heart of the Primordial Sea. I also believe the Goddess of Flowers, who's directly responsible for influencing Sumeru and its Archon. The Goddess of Flowers was responsible for King Deshert to learn these forbidden secrets, forbidden knowledge, beyond the false sky and the true meaning of Teyvat, the simulation that they're in, this bubble world and what really happened. So he did not want to be a puppet, carrying a Gnosis and being an Archon for Celestia. So he refused and rebelled, and, well, his civilization paid the ultimate price. Look at Venti and Istaroth also playing very significant role in both Mondstadt and Inazuma, both with the sacred Sakura and the Raiden Shogun sisters, and Venti himself having deep connections with wind and time, Zhongli being a mysterious descender that descended to Teyvat 6,000 years ago. I truly do believe Zhongli's connected with the Shade of Space or Void. But what does this have to do with Columbina? Well, if all of the shades are playing significant roles with each nation, and all have had a falling out with the current Celestian regime, the status quo, then not only do I believe Ronova to have played a part in Natlan, but Shaznaya as well. And I believe Columbina to be an angel from the old Celestia, a very powerful one at that, because of her third rank as a harbinger as strong as gods, but also for her to be an underling of the Shade of Death. something I've been preaching for over 2 years now. The Lord of Night literally says, the Shade of Death established the rules, and also under her guidance, I created the Night Kingdom. Also referring to herself as an angel. And if the captain was sent on his long journey from the Shade of Death, Ronova, is it such a stretch to think that Columbina would not only be an angel associated with death, similar to the Lord of Night, but maybe she was tasked with going along on his journey, aiding the Fatui Harbingers, and Columbina might be the reason that the Fatui Harbingers have access to unlimited forbidden knowledge on the false sky, on the truth of this world, the truth of the heavenly principles, everything that's going on, because they seem to know everything. And because she's a third harbinger and Capitano is the first, along with the Dore and Piero himself, they would all be in very close proximity of each other and working together, being that they would have worked together the longest. And what did Piero say? Seize authority from the gods?
In the name of Her Majesty the Tsaritsa, we will seize authority from the gods. But Rosaline, I promise you, your final resting place will be the entirety of the old world.
Bringing back the old world. Columbina would have been from that old world. An angel from Celestia. Clearly, it's clear as day. But why would she be closely associated with death under her guidance like the Lord of Night, not any of the other shades? Well, look at her constellation, or her symbol. It's a little dove in the shape of a heart, and on one side of the heart is a feather, which obviously doves have feathers, but the plume of death, the one artifact that represents the Shade of Death, because all the shades are represented by the artifacts along with the primordial one, which is the crown. But the Lord of Night, who is a confirmed angel of old Celestia, told us that she remained all these years by going into deep slumbers, which we just woke her up from. Columbina's always seen with her eyes closed, and the little dove is a dove that's crying with its eyes closed. Every single thing about this hints towards death, plus the fact that all of these biblically accurate looking angel-like creatures that can only be found roaming around Natlan are manifestations of the Night Kingdom in the Wyab, and Columbina has obviously been referenced to be an angel this whole time. That's not a secret to anybody. Back when this trailer first dropped, that's one of the first things people said. Whoa, she looks and kind of references an angel, but we don't really have those, or those haven't been talked about in Genshin. So she was the most ominous and obscure of all the Harbingers, which is why she's a fan favorite to this day. She just had such intrigue, and her constellation is misleading because doves actually are a good omen. That's why you see them released at weddings and things like that. They symbolize harmony. So why is her constellation the little dove? Well, just another reference to her being linked with death. Because her constellation just isn't a dove, it's a mourning dove. Mourning doves are associated and symbolize the mourning and sorrow of people, and are often released at funerals, which is obviously a ceremony because of somebody passing away. It's the most literal reference you can have. So all of that considered, it makes sense that she'd be an angel from Celestia, an old Seelie banished, one of the more powerful ones, like the Lord of Night, working under the guidance of the Shade of Death, one of the 4 apex angels of old Celestia, which in turn then makes sense why she would be associated with the Harbingers if Ronova herself sent the captain on his long journey. I also think this would perfectly fit Columbina's rank as the 3rd Harbinger and her status within the Fatui. I think it all checks out. And again, in Sumeru, I really do believe the Goddess of Flowers worked under the guidance of the Shade of Life the same way the Lord of Night does with Ronova. We're learning so much more about the shades and the inner workings of the old gods of Celestia. It's very interesting. And although Columbina might not be the Shade of Death, being associated with the Shade of Death, I think it's never been more obvious. Makes me feel validated for this video, seeing as that it's like 2.5 years old, and I re-uploaded it on my new channel, this channel. Even the outro from that video's from my old channel, because I loved that theory so much that I brought it over to this channel when I started it. But overall, Even if Columbina is under the guidance of the Shade of Death, did Columbina have a big part to play with the Tsaritsa? How the Tsaritsa rose to power? Because the Tsaritsa is not the original Cryo-Archon. And if the Shades did help cultivate all of the regions, in a recent video, my Morax video, I went over how the Shades, and there's a lot of evidence towards this, have been cultivating and undermining Celestia, playing a big part in how the nations formed with the Archons. There's a lot of evidence to point towards this, but I don't see why the Cryo-Archon would be any different. Besides the Shade of Death herself having ties with the Captain and very likely Columbina, those lines about her wallowing in self-pity and doing it out of an act of love reminds me a lot of the Tsaritsa, who is said to be the god of love that has no love left for her people. And if the Shades did have a falling out with the heavenly principles, then aiding the Fatui Harbingers as well as the Tsaritsa just makes more sense to me yet. And regardless if Columbina is even associated with Ronova, which all things point towards she is, but even if she isn't, she's still a Seelie. She's still an angel from Celestia. She has to be. Like, what else could she be that even makes remote sense at this point? But look what the Fatui know. The false sky, mentioned multiple times by the Harbingers. Dodora even says himself to Nahida that that's the truth hidden by Irminsul. Even Nahida did not know about the false sky.
Let me ask you, have you in all your mighty knowledge ever heard the rumor that the skies of Tevat are fake?
Huh?
That's the secret hidden by Irminsul concerning the truth of this world.
And that's a whole nother thing. Irminsul being foreshadowed and hinted at by the developers in a Q&A to be a foreshadowed future event, still needing to happen. Columbina could literally be doing the same thing that the Goddess of Flowers did with King Deshret, just unloading all of the secrets, everything. And the Fatui are 10 steps ahead of everyone that have no idea what's going on. It sort of makes you see a lot of things in a different light that happened in the past, like Scaramouche going to inspect the unreconciled stars back in 1.1 where he learns about the false sky. Piero sent him there. Maybe they wanted to confirm what they already knew, because he said the Jester could have gave me a little warning. They wanted to confirm what they learned from Columbina. And they sent Scaramouche there to learn for himself whether the third descender is Nibelung or some other descender. Regardless, Columbina would have witnessed this and know their identity, and would have also known about the Gnosis being the remains of the third descender, hence the Fatui gathering them up. Maybe a descender level power, once you have all 7, is enough to destroy Irminsul and challenge the heavens once more. Maybe the Traveler becomes the next Pyro Archon and they have to help, and we make a deal with the Fatui Harbingers to help them destroy Irminsul. There's a lot of interesting ways the story can go from here, but I really do think this Archon quest painted a really nice picture of Columbina and how she fits into all of this. As for the Captain and his long journey, what I find interesting is he went to Natlan right after the Cataclysm. He took a platoon with him, and he fought alongside Natlan, gaining some really close ties to this nation, and he cares about it. He does not want to see it fall, and he's a stand-up honorable guy. But unlike the other pure Conrians that have immortality, the Captain wears a mask because his flesh is rotting. He tells us he's not even remotely as strong as he used to be, which is already crazy. Malika can't even believe that. She feels like he's the peak of human strength, but he's nowhere near his prime. Now, why would he be associating with the God of Death anyway? Well, if she does have a part to play with the Conrians and how they're immortal, maybe the Captain is ready to die. Maybe that's how he joined the Harbingers to begin with, because he would have been in Natlan first before the Harbingers were founded. This is part of the journey Ronova sent him on. And if they made a bit of a deal or a pact, perhaps him seeing this through and aiding the Tsaritsa and the other Harbingers, his reward from the God of Death will be death. The Genshin Impact version of Blade, somebody that's immortal and just wants to die. But now, after 5.1, perhaps that's changed a little bit. Perhaps he not only wants to die, he wants to take the place of the Pyro Archon. As it was established, the Captain knows exactly the rules and the rules of death. She will demand the Pyro Archon's death for her aid against the Abyss and helping save Natlan. That has always been the rule, established by the first Pyro Archon in Ronova. But because we know Malwika will be playable, what if the captain is willing to take her place, give his own life so she may live? He's certainly honorable enough to do something this bold. I wouldn't put it past him. For him, it's killing two birds with one stone. Maybe he's ready to die. Most characters that have immortality yearn for death at some point. But overall, what do you think? Do you think Columbina is an angel from old Celestia? And if so, similar to the Lord of Night, do you think she follows the guidance of death? I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments. But before you go, I have a question if you don't mind answering. I splurged a little bit and got myself a new microphone. It's quite a bit more expensive than my older one, but weirdly enough, I can't really tell a difference in my voice, if it's any better or worse. But I think it might be because I hear myself talk so much through editing these videos, rewatching them before I upload. I have to hear myself talk a lot, so maybe I'm just not hearing it. So if you don't mind leaving me some feedback, if it sounds any better, if it sounds worse, if it's about the same but just different, let me know. But on that note, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.